Chakshura Unmilitam Ena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. In the continuation of reading Srila Prabhupada's Lilamrita, chapter 18, certainly none of the signers saw any immediate shape to the Swami's dream. Yet these seven purposes were not simply theistic, rhetoric invented to convince a few New York state government officials. Prabhupada meant to enact every item in the charter. Of course, he was now working in extremely limited circumstances. The principal place of worship, located at 26 Second Avenue in the city, county, and state of New York, was the sole headquarters for the Internal Society of Krishna Consciousness. Yet Prabhupada insisted that he was not living at 22nd Avenue, New York City. His vision was transcendental. His Guru Maharaj had gone but from the traditional holy places of spiritual meditation to preach in cities like Calcutta, Bombay, and Delhi. And yet, Prabhupada would say that his spiritual master had not really been living in any of those cities, but was always in Vaikuntha, the spiritual world, because of his absorption in devotional service. Similarly, the place of worship, 22nd Avenue, was not a New York storefront, a former curiosity shop. The storefront and the apartment had been spiritualized and were now a transcendental heaven. Society at large would come here, the whole world would take shelter here, regardless of race or religion. Plain, small, and impoverished as it was, Prabhupada regarded the storefront as a holy place of transcendental pastimes, dedicated to the personality of Krishna. It was a world headquarters, a publishing house, a sacred place of pilgrimage, and a center from which any army of devotees could issue forth and chant the holy names of God in all the streets in the world. The entire universe could receive Krishna consciousness from the internal society for Krishna consciousness, which was beginning here. In Keith, Prabhupada had a serious follower. Within a week of their meeting, Keith had moved out of the Mott Street apartment and was living with Prabhupada. He still dressed in his ragged denim shorts and t-shirt, but he began to do all the Swami's shopping and cooking. While in India, Keith had learned some of the etiquette of the reverence toward a holy man and the principles of discipleship. His friends watched him curiosity as he dedicated himself to the Swami. Keith, I saw that he was cooking, so I asked him if I could help, and he was very happy at the suggestion. The first couple of times he took me shopping, and after that I mostly did it. He showed me how to make chapatis without a rolling pin by pressing out the dough with your fingers. Every day we would make chapatis, rice, dal, and curries. So Keith became the dependable cook and housekeeper in Prabhupada's apartment. Meanwhile, at the Mott Street apartment, the roommates' favorite topic for discussion was the relationship with the Swami. Everyone thought it was a serious relationship. They knew Swamiji was Guru, and when they heard that he would be giving daily classes at 6 a.m. up in his apartment, they were eager to attend. I used to walk along the Bowery and look for flowers for him. When there were no flowers, I would take a straw or some grass. I loved going over there in the morning. Howard, I would walk very briskly over to Swamiji's, chanting Hare Krishna, feeling better than ever before. Miraculously, the Lower East Side no longer looked drab. The sidewalks and buildings seemed to sparkle, and in the early morning, before the smog set in, the sky was red and golden. Chuck, I bought a few grapes and came to the door of the Swami. This was all new. Previously, I would always walk toward McDougall Street, toward Bohemian aesthetic New York, and now I was walking to the Lower East Side toward the business district where there were no freaks, artists, or musicians, but simply straight buildings. And somehow, outside the carnival atmosphere, there was the richest attraction for the senses and the heart. Forward. I would sing all the way for the foyer, then ring the buzzer marked AC Bhakti Vedanta Swami, and the door would buzz and open, and would walk through the hallway into the small patio and up onto his small second floor apartment, tiptoeing quietly so as not to wake up the neighbors. Check. I came into the hall of his building, and there were many, many names printed on plaques over the mailbox. I immediately found the name A.C. Bhaktivedant Swami handwritten on a slip of toned paper, slipped into one of the slots. I rang the buzzer and waited. After a few moments, the door buzzed loudly and I entered through the security lock. I walked through the small garden into the rear building and upstairs. Prabhupada held his classes for almost 2 months in the privacy of his room, the same room where he typed and talked to guests. To Keith, it was not simply a class in philosophy, but a mystical experience of sweetness. Keith, the sound of his voice, the sun coming up, he would chant for a few minutes, softly clapping hands, and Swamiji would speak. The thing that got me most was simply the sound of his voice, especially while he was chanting Sanskrit. It was like music to my ears to hear him speak the raw sound. So as not to disturb the neighbors, Prabhupada would say, chant softly, and he asked the boys to clap softly, so softly that their hands barely touched. Then he would chant the prayers to the spiritual master, Samasradva, Samsara Dhavanala Lidhaloka. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy. Just as cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it, so the spiritual master extinguishes the blazing fire of material existence. With his eyes closed, he sat singing softly in the dim morning light. The few who attended, Keith, Howard, Chuck, Steve, Valley, sat entranced. Never before had the Swami been so appreciated. Chuck, the Swami was sitting there, and in the mornings he would look not shiny and brilliant but very withdrawn. He looked as if he could sit like a stone maybe forever. His eyes were only two tiny slits of glistering light. He took out his cymbals and played lightly on the edge. One, two, three, and he began to sing in a deep voice that was almost atonal in its intervals. It was a melody monotone that did not express happiness or sadness, a timeless chant that told no story. We chanted along with him as best we could, but several times Swamiji stopped and said softly, after about 30 minutes of chanting, we stopped. Then he opened his eyes wider and said, we must chant softly because sometimes the neighbors are complaining. So we stop here for today's reading and see how slowly the things are falling into place. Prabhupada converts the storefront into a worshipable altar, and people started realizing it's not merely just a place to reside, it's like a transcendental place and a worshipable place, which is open for every race of the human being from every corner of the world to come and chant Hare Krishna. And we see that Keith and the other boys started realizing that it is not an ordinary or a simply kind of a activity. They started also experiencing a kind of an attraction, being drawn towards Prabhupada. See that Prabhupada started implementing like early morning hours, um, doing the chanting and the praying, and also involved Keith, as since Keith already had an idea about some disciplic uh, services to be performed unto the spiritual masters, and he was to a certain extent implementing. Maybe that also um, left as an example for the others to understand the disciplic service towards the spiritual master. So we'll stop